The morning Eleanor Sutton pulled up to the old farmhouse, her knuckles were white against the steering wheel. The eviction notice sat on the passenger seat beside her granddaughter's birthday cake order form, the cake she could no longer afford. At 52, with 25 years of marriage dissolved into nothing but debt and disappointment, Eleanor had never imagined she would be starting over. Is that where great-grandma Martha lived? 8-year-old Abby pressed her small face against the window, eyes wide with wonder rather than the despair Eleanor felt. The Oklahoma wind whipped dust devils across the cracked earth, as if warning them away from the weathered farmhouse that seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to collapse. Yes, sweetheart. This is it. Eleanor didn't have the heart to tell Abby that this inheritance, 60 acres of dried-up dreams, might be their last hope rather than the blessing her granddaughter imagined. Just yesterday, Eleanor had stood in their apartment in Detroit, holding the final eviction notice in trembling hands. William had left her for his 28-year-old secretary, taking their savings and leaving Eleanor with a mortgage she couldn't afford and a credit score destroyed by the debts he'd hidden. The timing couldn't have been crueler, the notice arriving on Abby's birthday. When the phone rang with news of an inheritance from a grandmother Eleanor had never met, it had felt like the universe offering a lifeline, however frayed. She had sold her wedding ring, 25 years of false promises condensed into enough gas money to make it to Oklahoma. As they approached the farmhouse, Eleanor wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The barn had surrendered to gravity, its roof caved in like broken ribs. The chicken coop listed dangerously to one side. The house itself stood crooked against the horizon, paint peeling like dead skin. "We can fix it, Grandma," Abby said with the simple certainty that only children possess. "Look, wildflowers are still growing." Eleanor squeezed her granddaughter's hand, wishing she shared even a fraction of that optimism. Her daughter, Abby's mother, had died 3 years ago in a car accident, leaving Eleanor to raise her granddaughter alone. Now they were all each other had. The front door wasn't locked. It opened with a groan that echoed through empty rooms. Inside, everything was exactly as Martha had left it. Dishes in the sink, a calendar on the wall still showing March 1972. Dust thick as winter snow on every surface. Why did great-grandma live here all alone? Abby ran her finger along a windowsill, watching dust motes dance in shafts of afternoon light. Eleanor wished she knew. Her own mother had rarely spoken of Martha, only saying that her mother had chosen isolation over family for reasons she never explained. Eleanor had grown up with the vague impression of a distant, difficult woman who had abandoned her only daughter. As night fell, they cleared enough dust to make the living room habitable. Abby fell asleep quickly, bundled in her sleeping bag, exhausted from the journey. Eleanor sat by the window, staring at the stars that blazed with impossible brightness away from city lights. For the first time in months, no one could evict them. This broken-down farmhouse might not be much, but it was theirs. A sudden, sharp knocking jolted Eleanor from her thoughts. Through the window, Eleanor could make out a tall silhouette on the porch. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Abby stirred but didn't wake. Who could possibly be here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? Eleanor whispered to herself, heart hammering. She grabbed a heavy flashlight, the closest thing to a weapon she could find, and approached the door. "Don't mean to frighten you, ma'am, but I saw your lights earlier." The voice was deep, weathered by time but gentle. "Name's Thomas Reed, live about 5 miles east. Only neighbor you've got within shouting distance." Eleanor hesitated, then turned the knob. The man on the porch was older, around 70, with a face carved by sun and hardship. Silver hair cropped short beneath a worn cowboy hat. His posture remained straight despite his age. Military, Eleanor guessed. "Eleanor Sutton," she introduced herself. "Martha was my grandmother." Thomas nodded as if this explained everything. Been watching the property since Martha passed. Folks from Westland Resources have been driving by, taking measurements, soil samples. He paused, studying her face. Martha wasn't just living here. She was protecting this place. Protecting it from what? Eleanor asked. Thomas's weathered face creased into a slight smile that held no humor. That's the question, isn't it? He helped them secure the house, hammering boards over the most vulnerable windows, checking locks that hadn't been used in years. He moved with the efficiency of someone used to solving practical problems, his hands strong despite their age. Most folks thought Martha was just a reclusive old lady, Thomas said as he worked, voice low. But I knew better. She was safeguarding something important. Question is, what? Eleanor helped him work, grateful for his unexpected kindness while her mind raced with questions. Why would her grandmother spend her life watching over this worthless farm? The next morning, Abby woke Eleanor by tugging excitedly on her arm. Grandma, I found something. She clutched an old porcelain doll, its face cracked but beautiful, its dress faded from what must have once been red velvet. Eleanor's breath caught. The doll was identical to one she'd had as a child, a treasured possession that had disappeared during one of their many moves after her father died. Where did you find this? In a box in the closet. There are photo albums, too. In what must have been Martha's bedroom, Eleanor found the albums thick with dust. She sat on the sagging bed and opened one carefully. The photographs showed a woman she barely recognized. Martha, young and laughing, standing in front of the farmhouse when it was fresh and white and proud. There was a man beside her, handsome with intense eyes. George Sutton, Eleanor's grandfather, who had died before she was born. They look happy, Abby said, peering over her shoulder. They did. In photo after photo, they looked blissfully happy. The fields were green. The barn was straight. The chicken coop was full of white hens. They were building something together, creating a life from soil and sweat and hope. But then the photos changed. George disappeared. Martha's smile faded. The backgrounds grew progressively more desolate, as if the land was dying along with whatever had broken her grandmother's heart. The final photo was labeled simply, Martha and George, 1955, the last day of happiness. Eleanor found letters tucked between album pages. Letters Martha had written to Eleanor's mother, but never sent. Letters full of cryptic references to the burden of knowing and the price of silence. Grandma, look, Abby called from outside. Eleanor found her near the chicken coop, pointing at the floor. There's a loose board, see? It moves when I push it. Eleanor knelt for a closer look. The board wasn't rotten. In fact, it looked newer than the others, almost as if it had been replaced. She worked her fingers under the edge and was about to pull when the sound of an approaching vehicle made them both freeze. A sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway, followed by two more. A man in an expensive suit emerged from the lead vehicle, his smile practiced and cold. Harrison Wells, Westland Resources. He extended his hand. I understand you've recently inherited this property. I'd like to make you an offer. Have you ever wondered what secrets your family might be hiding? What would you do if you discovered your legacy was built on a terrible truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. $250,000, Wells said, handing Eleanor his business card. Twice the market value for immediate sale. The offer was tempting. More money than Eleanor had seen in years. Enough to start fresh somewhere else, to give Abby the stability she deserved. But something about Wells' smile, the way his eyes kept darting past her to the fields beyond, made her hesitate. I need time to consider, Eleanor said. Wells' demeanor changed subtly. You'd be smart to take this offer, Miss Sutton. No good comes from digging into the past. Before Eleanor could respond, the rumble of a truck announced Thomas's arrival. Wells' smile tightened as the older man approached. This is private property, Wells said, voice hardening. Then what are you doing on it? Thomas's response was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. Wells turned back to Eleanor. Think about my offer. It won't be on the table long. Then he was gone, gravel crunching under the tires of his expensive vehicle. Don't trust that snake. Thomas watched the SUV disappear. He's Westland's errand boy. They've been trying to buy up land around here for years. What do they want with worthless farmland? Thomas's face creased into a grim smile. Nothing's worthless if you know what's underneath it. As if on cue, Abby came running from the chicken coop, excitement making her voice higher than usual. Grandma, look what I found! In her small hand was a piece of metal, dull in most places, but with an edge that caught the sunlight with an unusual blue-green glow. Thomas's expression changed instantly. Don't touch that with bare hands. He carefully took the fragment using a handkerchief. That's uranium ore. After thoroughly washing Abby's hands, they returned to the chicken coop. Thomas pried up the loose board, revealing a space underneath deliberately carved into the hard-packed earth. Inside was a metal box with Martha's initials etched into the top. Eleanor's heart pounded as she lifted out the box. It was locked, but the lock was simple, rusted. Thomas found a rock and struck it until it broke open. Inside, wrapped in an old silk scarf, was a leather pouch. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing dozens of small gold ingots gleaming dully in the afternoon light. Beneath the pouch was an envelope yellowed with age, her name written across it in careful script. For Eleanor, when you're ready to know the truth. That's not just any gold, Thomas said, examining one of the bars. That's high-purity native gold, the kind that sometimes occurs alongside uranium deposits. There's maybe 500,000 here. Eleanor could barely process what she was hearing. $500,000 in gold hidden under a chicken coop on seemingly worthless land. With shaking fingers, she opened the envelope and began to read. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I could never bring myself to use or speak of. This gold was not stolen, though many would say it was. It is not cursed, though it brought me nothing but sorrow. It is simply the price of a choice I made long ago. Your grandfather George was not the farmer everyone believed him to be. He was a geologist sent to survey this land for Midwest Energy in 1955. What he found was a uranium deposit that could have made us wealthy beyond imagination. The land was ours. The rights were ours. The future was ours. But on the day we were to sign the papers to begin mining, a man came to our door. He worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and carried documents I had never seen. Proof that this land had been stolen from the Osage Nation in 1921, taken through forged documents during the Reign of Terror when Osage people were murdered for their mineral rights. My own father had been part of it, though I never knew. The man's name was James Running Bear. He didn't want money. He wanted justice. He was Osage, and his grandmother had been killed for this land. He showed us proof, photographs, testimonies, records that had been hidden for decades. The uranium deposit sat on sacred ground, a place where his people had buried their dead for generations. George wanted to fight it. He said we owned the land legally, that the past was the past. But I looked at the pictures of the murdered families, read the testimonies of children who'd watched their parents die for oil rights, and I knew I couldn't build wealth on such sorrow. We made a deal. James and his family would be given time to document everything, to build a legal case to reclaim the land. In exchange, he helped us extract enough gold and uranium to ensure we could leave, start over somewhere else. 1 box for you, he said. The rest stays in the ground. But George couldn't let it go. The night before we were to leave, he went back for more. James caught him at the deposit, and in the struggle, I can't write what happened next. I've lived with it for 40 years, and the weight never lessens. George died that night, and James helped me bury him beneath the old oak tree. He could have turned me in, could have taken everything. Instead, he helped me hide the truth and told me to leave. But I couldn't. This land had taken everything from James's family, and now it had taken everything from mine. I felt I had to stand watch to make sure no one else ever found what lay beneath. I sent you and your mother away to protect you from this truth, from the burden of knowing. James died 5 years ago. His son, Samuel Running Bear, knows the story. His number is at the bottom of this letter. The gold in this box is yours to do with as you choose. It's worth enough to change your life. But know this, the deposit is still there, larger than anything you can imagine, and the land still belongs to the dead, both Osage and your grandfather, all of us bound together by greed and sorrow and choices that echo through generations. I'm sorry I couldn't be the grandmother you deserved. I'm sorry I chose ghosts over the living, but now you must choose. Take the gold and run, or stay and face the truth that this land demands. All my love and regret, Martha Sutton. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper. Abby sat quiet beside her, somehow understanding this moment was too big for questions. Thomas stood silent as well, his weathered face unreadable. The afternoon sun climbed higher, heating the red earth, making the gold in Eleanor's lap flash accusations. A fortune built on blood, a secret wrapped in sacrifice, a choice between wealth and justice that had destroyed her family once already. She looked at Abby, at her innocent face and trusting eyes, and wondered what kind of legacy she wanted to leave. Those Osage murders were real. Thomas broke the silence. Called it the Reign of Terror. White men married Osage women for their head rights, then killed them for the mineral wealth. The government looked the other way. Eleanor struggled to process what she was hearing. Her grandfather, a secret geologist, not a farmer, a uranium deposit worth millions. Her grandmother living as a sentinel to preserve a secret that had cost her everything. The gold could solve everything. Private school for Abby, a real home, security, freedom from the crushing weight of poverty. Or it could be the beginning of another 40 years of guilt. Eleanor found Samuel Running Bear's number at the bottom of the letter and dialed. A deep voice answered on the third ring. This is Eleanor Sutton. I think you've been waiting for my call. A long pause. I've been waiting for 40 years. They agreed to meet that afternoon. As they prepared to leave, Thomas insisted Abby stay with his wife, Ruth. It's not safe, he said. Westland has eyes everywhere. On the drive to the meeting, Thomas shared more of his story. He joined the Army Rangers after college, served for decades, then returned to Oklahoma to retire. His background in geology had drawn him into consulting work, including a brief stint with Westland Resources. That's when he'd started to suspect something wasn't right. I knew your grandmother was hiding something, he said, just didn't know what. She chased me off with a shotgun whenever I got too close to that chicken coop. Eleanor smiled despite herself, imagining the fierce old woman defending her secret. Why did you stay? Watch over her all those years. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Because she reminded me of someone, my wife's mother. Same kind of strength, the kind that bends but never breaks. His eyes softened when he looked at Eleanor. I see that same strength in you. Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years, the simple recognition of her resilience by someone who understood the cost of survival. When they reached the diner, Samuel Eagle was easy to spot, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that held decades of patience. You look like her, he said when Eleanor approached. Your grandmother, same eyes. Have you ever had to choose between financial security and doing what's right? What would you choose in Eleanor's situation? Let me know in the comments below. Samuel shared everything, original land records, Proof of the murders, the theft, all his family had gathered over decades. "We have enough now to make a legal claim," he explained, "to finally get justice for what was taken." "Then why haven't you?" Thomas asked. Samuel smiled sadly. "Because your grandmother wouldn't let us. She said the land needed a guardian, someone to make sure the uranium stayed buried. She was afraid if we brought attention to it, the sacred ground would be destroyed." As they spoke, Thomas's phone rang. Ruth's voice was tight with controlled fear. Abby had developed a fever and nosebleed that wouldn't stop. By the time they returned to the ranch, she was pale and listless. Eleanor's heart pounded with fear as Thomas drove them to the emergency room, breaking every speed limit. "Radiation sickness," the doctor confirmed hours later. "Mild but concerning. She must have been exposed to radioactive material." While Abby slept, sedated and monitored, Eleanor stepped into the hallway to gather her thoughts. Her phone rang, an unknown number. "I underestimated you, Miss Sutton." Harrison Wells' voice was silk over steel. "I thought you were just another desperate woman who'd take the money and run." Eleanor felt a chill despite the hospital's warmth. "What do you want?" "A meeting. Just you and me. No lawyers, no tribal representatives, no retired rangers playing bodyguard. I think we can find a compromise that benefits everyone." Every instinct told Eleanor to refuse, to hang up, to let the legal process unfold. But Wells was powerful, connected. He could drag things out for years, drain resources Eleanor didn't have, make life hell for her and Abby while the courts deliberated. What kind of compromise? $10 million. Wells named the figure casually, as if discussing the weather. "For the land, the mineral rights, and your silence about certain historical matters that are better left in the past." The number was staggering, more money than Eleanor had ever imagined possessing. It would mean security, opportunity, freedom from financial worry forever. All she had to do was walk away from Samuel, from the Osage's century-long quest for justice, from her grandmother's 40-year vigil. "I'll think about it," Eleanor kept her voice neutral. "Don't think too long." Wells's tone hardened. "My offer expires at midnight." When she returned to Abby's room, Thomas took one look at her face and knew. "Wells called you." Eleanor nodded, sinking into the chair beside Abby's bed. The child was asleep again, peaceful and innocent. 10 million for the land and our silence. "That's how they operate," Thomas said. "Buy what they can't steal, silence what they can't deny." His eyes held a question he was too respectful to ask directly. "I told him I'd think about it." "And will you?" Thomas's tone held no judgment, only curiosity. Eleanor looked at her sleeping granddaughter, thinking of all 10 million could provide. The best schools, college, travel. Opportunities Eleanor had never dreamed of for herself. Then she thought of Martha Sutton living alone in a decaying farmhouse, maintaining her lonely vigil over buried secrets and stolen land for 40 years. She thought of the Osage families in the photographs, their lives and mineral rights stolen through murder and fraud. "My grandmother chose 40 years of loneliness to preserve that land." Eleanor's voice grew stronger with each word. "She could have taken the gold and vanished, but she stayed. She kept watch. She made sure no one else would suffer or die for what's buried there. I won't betray that in a single night for any amount of money." Thomas reached across and covered her hand with his, a gesture of support that felt like an anchor in a storm. "Your grandmother would be proud. What would you be willing to sacrifice for justice? Have you ever stood up against powerful interests? I'd love to hear your stories." As Abby recovered in the hospital, Westland Resources escalated their campaign. They filed a lawsuit claiming Eleanor had no legal right to the mineral deposits. According to their filing, a 1958 deed transfer had explicitly separated surface rights from mineral rights, with the latter remaining with a holding company that Westland had conveniently acquired. They were also suing Eleanor personally for defamation, $10 million in damages. The figure couldn't be coincidence. Exactly what Wells had offered her, now weaponized as a threat. They're hoping to muddy the waters, Samuel explained. Drag things out until you give up. Eleanor appreciated the encouragement, but reality loomed large. How long will all this take? Months? Years? Probably years. Samuel didn't sugarcoat it. These cases are marathons, not sprints. Years of legal battles. Years of uncertainty. Years of looking over her shoulder, wondering if Wells would resort to more direct methods of persuasion. Years of trying to build a stable life for Abby while carrying the weight of this dispute. The prospect was exhausting. "You're not alone in this fight," Samuel assured her. "The tribal council has authorized our legal team to represent you. Environmental groups are filing briefs. Historical preservation societies are involved." That night, as Abby slept beside her in the hospital room, Eleanor found a second porcelain doll among their belongings that Martha had brought from the ranch. Examining it carefully, she discovered a hidden compartment containing another key and a note with a single word: oak. The old oak tree where George Sutton was buried. Thomas's eyes widened when Eleanor showed him the key. "Martha left a backup plan," he said, pulling out a small key attached to his keychain. "She gave me this years ago. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure you got it. I've carried it every day since she died." Eleanor stared at the key, understanding blooming. Her grandmother had anticipated everything: Westland's interests, possible threats, the need for backup plans, and trusted allies. Under cover of darkness, Thomas drove Eleanor to the far edge of her property. The old oak tree stood silhouetted against the starry sky, ancient and imposing, its trunk marked with Osage symbols. The key fit a hidden panel cunningly disguised in the tree trunk. Inside was a waterproof metal container. They didn't open the box until they were safely back at Thomas's ranch. Inside was a leather-bound journal, George Sutton's field notes, and a sealed envelope labeled simply "Evidence." Unlike Martha's letter, written decades after the events, this was a contemporary account. George had recorded everything: his assignment to survey the land, his discovery of uranium, the company's excitement. But more importantly, he documented the visit from James Running Bear, the evidence of land theft, and the moral crisis that followed. May 15, 1955. Eagle brought documents today that change everything. Land deeds showing fraudulent transfers from Osage headright owners to white guardians, then to banks, then to developers. Photographs of Osage families who died mysteriously after oil was discovered on their land. And most damning, letters between Charles Wells and John Harper discussing how to acquire certain properties with troublesome owners. Martha is devastated. Her father was Harper's business partner. "Our home, our future, is built on stolen land and possibly murder." May 17, 1955. Meeting with C. Wells Jr. today. He says his father's alleged involvement in the Osage matters is ancient history and best left buried. Offered to buy our silence, $50,000 in guaranteed employment if we proceed with the uranium claims without mentioning the Osage connection. When I asked about returning the land to its rightful owners, he laughed, said dead Indians don't file lawsuits. The final entries revealed what had truly happened on the night George died. He had planned to return to the deposit against Martha's wishes, to take more ore to sell privately through a buyer arranged by Charles Wells Jr. The journal ended there on the night George Sutton died. But the envelope contained something even more valuable: photographs and a micro cassette tape. The photograph showed Charles Wells Sr. with Eleanor's great-grandfather and other men standing over what appeared to be a freshly dug grave. The tape, according to Martha's handwriting, contained a conversation between George Sutton and Charles Wells Jr., discussing both the uranium deposit and handling the Osage problem as their fathers had. "This changes everything," Thomas whispered. "This isn't just historical evidence. That tape could be proof of conspiracy, accessory to murder. There's no statute of limitations on homicide." Westland Resources grew increasingly desperate. Judge Bennett, a longtime friend of Wells, invalidated Eleanor's attempt to transfer the land to the Osage Nation, claiming it was a fraudulent attempt to avoid legal liability. He ordered the property returned to Eleanor's ownership and granted Westland an emergency exploration permit. Within 24 hours, Westland would be on the land drilling core samples, extracting uranium, desecrating what the Osage considered sacred ground, all with apparent legal blessing. The injustice burned in Eleanor's throat, the bitter taste of a system still weighted toward power and money over truth and right. "Judge Bennett overreached," Thomas said, studying the court order. "This won't stand up to federal scrutiny, but he's given us an opening. If the land is legally yours again, even temporarily, you have property owner rights that Westland has to respect." They were up before dawn, preparing to meet Westland at the farm. Thomas contacted his network of former rangers, strategically positioning them on his property adjacent to Eleanor's land. Samuel brought tribal attorneys with radiation expertise. When Westland's vehicles arrived, 3 drilling trucks, several SUVs with security personnel, and a mobile command center, they found their intended work site already occupied. Harrison Wells himself emerged from the lead vehicle, his composed corporate demeanor visibly strained. "This is pointless obstruction, Miss Sutton," he said, gesturing toward the drilling equipment being unloaded. "We have legal authorization to conduct exploration activities." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "And we're not obstructing anything. As the legal owner of this property, I'm simply exercising my right to monitor activities that could potentially impact the environment and my granddaughter's health." Hour after hour, they delayed the operation through perfectly legal means, requesting documentation, questioning safety protocols, monitoring radiation levels. By noon, drilling had yet to begin, costing Westland thousands in equipment and personnel time. The situation escalated when one of Thomas's radiation detectors registered an anomalous reading. The tribal attorney immediately requested work be halted until the source could be identified, a reasonable safety precaution that Wells vehemently opposed. "There's no danger," Wells insisted dismissively. "Our equipment is state-of-the-art. Our protocols exceed federal requirements. This is just another delay tactic." Before he could press the issue, new vehicles appeared, 2 unmarked government SUVs that Eleanor immediately recognized as FBI. The agents who emerged carried a federal warrant to inspect the site in connection with an ongoing investigation. The warrant covers potential violations of environmental regulations, securities fraud related to undisclosed liabilities, and witness intimidation, the agent explained as Westland employees were directed away from their equipment. What had been Wells' show of force transformed within minutes into a federal crime scene. His shortcuts, his threats, his manipulation of local officials had worked when dealing with individuals. But against the federal government, those same tactics created vulnerability. By late afternoon, Westland personnel were withdrawing their equipment, operations suspended indefinitely pending multiple investigations. Wells himself departed under escort, his phone and laptop seized as potential evidence. His corporate armor finally pierced by the truth Martha had preserved for 40 years. If you've enjoyed this story so far, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of courage and redemption. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. I read everyone. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood before a small audience at the Osage Cultural Center. The tribal council had organized a ceremony to mark the official return of the land, and Eleanor had been asked to speak about Martha's role in its story. "My grandmother, Martha Sutton, stood watch over that land for 40 years, Eleanor began, finding her voice growing stronger with each word. "She chose loneliness over profit, silence over comfort, duty over ease. For decades, I thought she'd abandoned us, chosen ghosts over family. Now I understand she was protecting us, preserving not just minerals in the ground, but truth that needed to wait for its proper time. She looked around the room at the faces of Osage elders who had waited generations for this acknowledgement, at Samuel, whose grandfather's confrontation with her grandfather had set this circle in motion, at Thomas, whose quiet vigilance had extended Martha's protection to a new generation. There are debts that can never be fully repaid, she continued, wrongs that can never be completely righted, but acknowledgement is where healing begins. My grandmother knew that. She kept watch so that someday, when the time was right, the truth could emerge, and the land could return to those from whom it was stolen. After the ceremony, Eleanor found herself drawn to a display case near the entrance. Inside was a familiar object, the porcelain doll Abby had found at the farm, its cracked face and faded red velvet dress carefully preserved behind glass. Beside it lay a photograph of Martha as a young woman standing proudly before the farmhouse in its prime. The exhibit label read simply, "Guardian of Truth, Martha Sutton preserved this land and its secrets for 40 years, ensuring justice would eventually prevail." Eleanor felt a presence beside her and turned to find an elderly Osage woman studying her face. "I knew your grandmother," the woman said softly. "We all thought she was just a strange white woman who wanted to be left alone. None of us knew she was safeguarding our ancestors' bones, our stolen heritage." "I wish I had known her better," Eleanor admitted. The woman nodded. "But you knew her heart. You made the same choice she did when you could have chosen differently. That tells me you knew the most important part of her." Samuel approached as the woman moved away. "The tribal council met this morning," he said. "They've authorized me to offer you a position at our cultural center, developing educational programs about this land's history, the connection between our peoples." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "I don't have any qualifications for something like that." Samuel's smile was gentle. "You have the most important qualification. You lived this story. You chose justice over personal gain. You helped return stolen land to its rightful caretakers. The position included modest housing near the cultural center and educational opportunities for Abby at the tribal school. It wasn't wealth, wasn't the financial security the uranium deposit might have provided, but it offered something perhaps more valuable: purpose, community, a chance to be part of healing rather than exploitation. "We need people who can bridge worlds," Samuel continued. "Someone who understands both sides of this history. My people respect what you did, Eleanor. What Martha did before you. You both stood watch over this land when you could have profited from it. That means something to us." That evening, Thomas invited Eleanor and Abby to dinner at his ranch. As they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the Oklahoma sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Abby played with Thomas's border collie in the yard. "You know," Thomas said quietly, "I've got 60 acres adjoining yours. Been thinking of planting wildflowers next spring." Abby mentioned she loves them. Eleanor smiled, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Possibility. At 52, she thought certain chapters of her life were closed forever. But watching Thomas's weathered face in the fading light, she wondered if perhaps new beginnings could happen at any age. "I think wildflowers would be perfect," she said. Their hands rested inches apart on the porch railing, not quite touching, but aware of each other's presence. There was time for that. For once, time felt like a gift rather than an enemy. That night, in their new home near the cultural center, Eleanor tucked Abby into bed in a room that didn't leak or sag, in a house with electricity and running water, and neighbors within shouting distance. Such simple comforts, yet they felt like luxury after the decaying farmhouse. "Are you sad we didn't keep the treasure?" Abby asked sleepily. Eleanor considered the gold now in FBI custody, the uranium deposit worth hundreds of millions that would remain forever buried. "No," she said truthfully. "Some treasures cost too much. They made great-grandma Martha sad for 40 years. I'd rather have what we have now. Friends, purpose, a place where we belong. Abby nodded, satisfied with the answer. Me too. And Mr. Thomas says I can start writing lessons next week. He says I remind him of you. I don't give up. As her granddaughter drifted toward sleep, Eleanor stood at the window, looking out at the stars over Osage land. She thought of Martha, standing watch alone for decades, and felt a connection across time. Grandmother to granddaughter, guardian to storyteller. Martha had preserved the truth. Eleanor would share it. Martha had protected in isolation. Eleanor would honor through community. The circle was complete. The land had returned to its rightful caretakers. The truth had emerged from darkness into light. The next morning, she joined a welcoming ceremony at the cultural center. The Osage elders had prepared a traditional meal and invited Eleanor and Abby to join their community. As they sat among their new neighbors, sharing stories and breaking bread, Eleanor felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in decades. Thomas sat beside her, their shoulders occasionally brushing, a subtle reminder of another possibility unfolding. When he smiled at her across the table, the years of loneliness seemed to recede like shadows at dawn. And Eleanor Sutton, who had inherited a worthless farm and a buried secret, had found something she hadn't known she was seeking. Not wealth or security, but purpose, belonging, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done right by her grandmother's legacy, and perhaps in time, a second chance at love. Martha Sutton had safeguarded the land's secrets for 40 years. Eleanor and Abby would help share its truths for generations to come. It was never too late to begin again, never too late to heal, never too late to find home.